Since 1983, the Ninja 250R has defined the entry-level sport bike category. This liquid-cooled parallel twin legend has been paralyzed for 20 years. We're here to see if the machine that revolutionized lightweight racing still has a pulse. The 250R is built to scream, but today it sits in total silence. Decades of grit have packed into the ignition tumblers. Any force on that key right now would destroy this precision lock for good. At around 150 kilograms, this is one of the lightest sport bikes ever built, but when it seized solid, every kilo fights back. A stable paddock stand is essential to protect the diamond-type frame before we begin the teardown. Beneath the grime, we're finally seeing color code 777 Kawasaki lime green. More than paint, this is the visual identity of a racing dynasty. pH neutral foam is the only safe way to lift decades of dirt without harming this iconic finish. Kawasaki engineered these fairings for peak aerodynamics, but prolonged UV exposure has left the ABS plastic dangerously compromised. Each mounting tab is irreplaceable. One snap bracket and a piece of this machine's history is gone forever. The exhaust headers on these parallel twins endure brutal heat cycles, and the result is severe galvanic corrosion. I'm applying MOS2 directly onto the rust bonds that have fused these bolts to the cylinder head. Chemistry is the only option here. This 249cc DOHC heart is finally free. A 4-5 kilogram masterpiece of engineering, but right now, its gears are locked solid and its heartbeat is gone. The real work starts here. See that white powder coating the engine mounts? That's aluminum oxide, a sign that even Kawasaki's high-grade alloys couldn't hold off 20 years of moisture. Every surface needs to be broken down to raw metal before this rebuild can meet factory standards. The EX250 drivetrain has a reputation for being bulletproof, but 2 decades of neglect have turned the original grease into hardened clay. If these needle bearings are seized, the Ninja's legendary agility is nothing but a memory. We've reached the skeleton. For this chassis to perform at speed, the frame geometry must be exact. Even a 2mm deviation in this steel cradle would turn a legend into a liability. Alloy casings and steel bolts expand at different rates when heated, and we're turning that physics against the rust. Controlled thermal expansion breaks the mechanical lock, holding these components hostage without risking the casing itself. Spark plugs are the windows to an engine's soul. Pulling these tells us everything about combustion health before we go deeper. Next up is the outer casing, coated in a hardened crust of road salt and baked on oil that's been cooking at over 200 degrees Celsius for 2 decades. Kawasaki built these engine casings from high-grade cast aluminum, a deliberate choice to keep weight low and performance sharp. Watch as the pressure wash strips away the white oxidation, bringing back the raw industrial finish that gave this machine its mini GP character. This goes far beyond standard paint. It's a high-temperature, resistant coating engineered specifically for extreme thermal stress. On an engine built to push hard and run hot, heat management isn't optional. This finish has to survive everything the Ninja throws at it. Stale fuel is a restorer's nightmare. Over time, ethanol separation transforms gasoline into an acidic varnish that eats through the tank's internal lining from within. The damage is silent, slow, and by the time you see it, it's already deep. This tank has to come down to bare steel. It's the only way to inspect every weld seam for structural integrity. Before we reseal this 1.8-liter vessel, the surface must be perfect. There's no shortcut when fuel containment is at stake. Targeted thermal shock is the tool here. Pinpoint heat forces carbon deposits and hardened gasket material to release their bond. Push too far and the alloy casing warps permanently. Stay in the window and these vintage components survive intact. Back to Factory Zero. Stripped of everything, this tank reveals the engineering logic of the early Ninja era, narrow enough for a locked-on knee grip, yet large enough to go the distance. A blank canvas waiting to carry its racing identity once more. These mounting brackets are the structural anchor for every aerodynamic fairing on this machine. A misalignment here, even by a few millimeters, throws off the entire body kit and compromises the drag coefficient. Kawasaki's engineers calculated down to 0.34. Internal rust is a silent carburetor killer. We're running electrolysis, a sacrificial anode drawing rust ions away from the tank wall through electrical current. It's the most precise, non-destructive cleaning method available, and the only one we trust on original 1980s steel. Nuts and bolts become our agitation media. Inside a tank this baffled, chemical solutions can't reach every pocket of flash rust, so we let mechanical friction do the work. Raw, simple, and exactly what this job calls for. Modern ethanol-blended fuels draw moisture in by nature, and standing water is what destroys vintage steel from the inside. This fuel-resistant epoxy sealer lays down a non-porous liner, sealing the tank wall against everything today's pump fuel carries. What you're seeing is acid-base neutralization in real time. The effervescence is hydrogen gas escaping as phosphoric acid converts iron oxide into a stable phosphate coating. We're fundamentally rebuilding the metal's own defense system at a chemical level. This toxic sludge is the varnish fuel chemistry gone wrong over 2 decades of sitting still, broken down into something far more destructive than gasoline. A single milligram reaching the Keihin carburetors would seize the pilot jets immediately. Every trace has to go. Welds laid down at Kawasaki's Akashi plant are now fully exposed for inspection. This high-tensile steel has held up remarkably, but every mounting point gets checked for stress fractures before anything goes back together. Industrial heritage and structural integrity read in the same pass. The oils from bare skin are enough to cause fish eyes in the final coat. An isopropyl alcohol wipe down brings the surface to 0 surface tension. Absolute cleanliness is the only guarantee that color code 777 bonds permanently and flawlessly. The Ninja 250R's identity lives in its sharp, aggressive lines. A 1 millimeter dent disrupts the airflow that defines this profile. Lightweight polyester putty lets us rebuild those precise GP-style contours without adding unnecessary mass. Color code 777 Kawasaki Lime Green. First adopted in the 1960s to defy racing superstition, it went on to become the color of champions. Watching this pigment coat the steel feels less like painting and more like reactivating the machine's identity. These fairings are ABS acrylonitrile butadiene styrene. 3 decades of UV exposure triggers photodegradation, breaking down the polymer chains until the plastic can no longer flex without fracturing. Removing this compromised layer requires the care of surgery when cracked and the original mold is lost. Fairing integrity isn't cosmetic, it directly affects airflow and heat dissipation around the engine. Plastic welding fuses the ABS back together at a structural level, recovering the clean bodywork profile that earned this machine the Ninja name. Moving from 400 to 800, grit is about more than surface smoothness. It's about building surface energy into the ABS, so the paint bonds with real conviction. Each pass of sandpaper is an investment in how long this restoration lasts. High-build urethane primer goes on next. This coat fills every micropore left by sanding and creates a chemical barrier between the raw plastic and the aggressive solvents in the color coat. Without this foundation, even the most vibrant lime green will fail. Wet sanding with 1000, grit takes the surface to optically flat, zero orange peel, zero texture. The structural and prep work is now complete. 70% of this restoration is invisible, but it's precisely that hidden work that separates a professional result from an amateur one. This is a three-stage paint process built to carry Kawasaki's racing identity forward. Lime green was originally engineered to cut through the low resolution of 1980s broadcast cameras, highly reflective, impossible to miss. We're not just spraying color, we're restoring a factory signature. The gloss black accents do more than define the aggressive lines. They frame the air intake geometry and give the fairing visual depth. The high solids clear coat going over everything delivers the UV protection this plastic never had from the factory, ensuring it stays flexible for decades to come. The EX250 drivetrain is built for punishment, but sustained neglect has finally caught up with it. The sprocket teeth are hooked, and the chain is riddled with stiff links from internal corrosion. A high-tensile O-ring chain gets this power delivery back to where it needs to be. Ozone cracking dry rot has turned these tires into rigid plastic. On a 250cc machine with a contact patch, this small tire compound softness is everything. Modern radial rubber goes on in their place, giving the Ninja back the precise, flickable handling it was built for. These hub components are interference fit, and oxidation has welded them shut. A controlled burst of localized heat expands the hub just enough to break the oxide bond without pulling the temper from the axle steel. Measured, deliberate, and non-negotiable. These cast alloy wheels were genuinely ahead of their era, slashing unsprung weight compared to conventional spokes and fundamentally changing how this machine responded through corners. Stripped back, the raw casting marks tell the full story of Kawasaki's manufacturing craft. Two-component epoxy black gives these wheels the hardness they need to stand up to brake dust, road salt, and decades of use. Once balanced, they become the Ninja's foundation, ready to lean hard into corners and hold a line the way this machine always could. Restoration means accountability to engineering history. Clearing surface carbon and heat pitting from these brake rotors and sprockets has returned them to exact working tolerances. These components have earned their place back on this machine. lithium-based grease on the pivot points, MOS2 on every high-stress contact surface. Each fastener torqued to its exact Newton-meter specification, because on aluminum threads this age, there is no margin for guesswork. This is what returning a machine to its built standard actually means. Steering head bearings set to zero play, forks rebuilt with fresh 10W oil. The damping feel that made the Ninja 250R a benchmark for cornering is back. Every input from the rider now reaches the road exactly as Kawasaki intended. In a diamond-type frame, the engine is a load-bearing member. Its mass and rigidity are built into the chassis structure itself. Dropping this DOHC twin back into its steel cradle, the Ninja's low center of gravity stance takes shape for the first time in 2 decades. These fairings represented Kawasaki's first full commitment to total aerodynamics for the street rider. Mounting this green armor is the final, functional step channeling airflow, precisely where the engine needs it. Completing the system these panels were always designed to serve. The Ninja name launched in 1984, stealth, precision, performance distilled into a single word. These decals are the final mark of authentication. What started as a rescue became something else entirely, a full resurrection of a machine that defined how a generation learned to ride. From corroded and seized to street-ready, rebuilt to the spec, it left Kawasaki's Akashi factory carrying 45 horsepower, fully alive. The silence is over.